My dear, unfortunate darlings, you found your way back to me. How delightfully reckless. I do admire that about you. Welcome to Spectral Margins, where we flirt with oblivion, dance with despair, and occasionally have a rather good time doing it. But before we go any further, I must insist you do something for me. No, put the ritual dagger down in him. That's for later. I need you to press that button. You know, the forbidden glyph that ensures your continued suffering. Pardon me. I meant enjoyment. Like, subscribe, tap the bell, summon the darkness directly into your feed. And, of course, leave a comment below. Tell me who's bold enough to join tonight's seance of storytelling. And Sherry, I better see your name down there. Don't think I won't send my most annoying Specter to knock over your coffee in the morning. Tonight, I have prepared a feast for your trembling little ears. A buffet of doom. A charcuterie board of bad decisions. First, a tale of decay, filth, and a man who should have learned that if you ignore a problem long enough, it does not go away, it seeps. Then, a ritual of desperation, an absolute masterclass in making ill-advised bargains with things that have too many eyes. And the main course. You may have sensed it. A whisper in the void, a shadow reassembling itself from the ether. A voice that once haunted you, wrapped around your fears like a velvet noose, is returning. Yes, my deliciously doomed friends. Jason Hill is rising from the depths. But we shall savor that revelation soon enough. First, let us attend to matters of the flesh. Flesh that festers, secrets that reek. A story of filth, guilt, and some truly questionable home improvement choices. Yes, home improvement. The noble art of covering up your past mistakes with a fresh coat of paint and a sincere lack of structural integrity. What's that? An ominous smell creeping through the floorboards? Must be the pipes. Strange knocking sounds at 3 a.m.? Definitely the house settling. Something writhing in the walls. Termites, obviously. But, my dear listeners, what if it's not? What if the past has a way of clawing itself free, no matter how many planks of wood you nail over it? What if the stench of regret is not just a metaphor, but something alive? Lucky for you, tonight's lesson in what not to do with your bad decision comes with a cautionary tale. Gather close, dearest doomed ones, and let me introduce you to Everything is Rotten. Tonight's tale peels back the skin of reality to reveal the festering truth beneath. A little mold, a little decay. What's life without a little touch of rot? Penned by the ever-twisted Michael Marks, and brought to life, if you can call it that, by the incomparable Geoff Sturtevant. I give you Everything is Rotten.
Everything is rotten. I'll start off by saying it was an accident. My wife could be a vindictive, evil, mean-spirited bitch, but I never meant to kill her. She threatened to leave, but that wasn't what caused me to grab her. It was when she threatened to take my daughter away from me. My little Tiffany. My only reason for living. It was late at night, and Tiffany was asleep when Kristen started in on her tirade about how she was done with me and done with the marriage. I told her she could leave, that if she was unhappy, she could just go, and I wouldn't try to stop her. It was when she headed for Tiffany's room, though, that I reached out and grabbed her by the arm. She fought against me and said horrible things about how she would make sure I never saw my daughter again. My child. I told her there was no way she was leaving with Tiffany, that she would need to kill me before I let her take my daughter from me. Things were heated, more so than they had ever been before. That's when she slapped me across the face and started clawing at me. I was only trying to defend myself, and I pushed her. She lost her footing, and I heard a sickening crack as her head struck the corner of the coffee table. I saw the blood pooling around her skull immediately. I went to her side and looked into her blank eyes, hoping I was wrong, hoping I hadn't done what it looked like I had. I screamed for her to wake up, tears in my eyes. By that point, I hated my wife. I wanted her gone, but not like that. It was an accident. I almost called the police. I really did. I didn't kill her on purpose, so I had nothing to hide, I thought. A man of honor and scruples is what I always tried to be. But then I thought of Tiffany. How could I tell my daughter her mother was dead, and that I killed her? Even if it was just an accident, Tiffany was only 4. How could she ever understand? I put the phone down and started thinking of what to do next. Luckily, we hadn't woke Tiffany with our fight. Still, I needed to move quickly, as she could get up at any moment, needing the bathroom or wanting a glass of water. I rolled Kristen up in the rug she had fallen on. It was easy, and luckily the rug was thick enough that none of her blood had seeped through to the hardwood beneath. I needed to think of a place to put her. I couldn't dig a grave right in my backyard, and someone might notice. I had a tool shed, though, with an earthen floor right beneath the floorboards. I set to work right away. The whole process went faster than I expected, ripping out the floorboards, digging the grave, and burying Kristen, rug and all, before replacing the boards. Afterwards, I packed some of her things and threw them in the trunk of her car. I even got a stroke of luck when I found a nice little Dear John letter, written to yours truly, tucked away behind her jewelry. She'd been intending to leave me for months, and in the letter, she even called out how she was going to make sure I never saw Tiffany again. Not because I was a bad father, mind you. No, quite the opposite. She was going to do it just so I would be miserable. Evil, vindictive bitch, I thought to myself. I know I wasn't perfect, but when it came to my daughter, I did anything for her. It made me feel justified in what I'd done. I still felt guilty for killing her and needed to remind myself it was an accident, but still, I felt no remorse for hiding it. The Dear John gave me perfect cover, too, if anyone came looking for her. I don't know, I just woke up and found this letter one morning. I guess she had a change of heart about taking Tiffany and just left. I thought it would be easy, and for the first week it was. No one from her family who would have cared she vanished was still alive. And anyone who she may have called friend bought the excuse of the letter wholeheartedly. I guess she had spouted off about doing it enough times. I even got "I'm so sorry" sentiments from some of our friends, saying how I was too good for her anyway. It all seemed like it was going to be okay. Tiffany was the hardest to explain it to. I just told her that Mommy and Daddy had a fight, and Mommy needed to leave for a while. When she asked when Mommy would be back, I told her I wasn't sure, but that her Mommy loved her and would think of her every day. In the meantime, Daddy was here, and he would take the best care of her he could. She seemed a little confused, but accepted it. It wasn't perfect, but I figured it would do for the short term. Yes, everything was going to be okay. Until the rot set in. First, I noticed it around the tool shed. The wooden planks had become covered with mold, seemingly overnight. I wondered to myself if burying Kristen there had anything to do with it, but quickly dismissed it. I had buried her deep, and I didn't know how bodies decomposed, but I was sure something like that couldn't happen. It was more likely just a coincidence. The shed was old, likely had a mold problem that was being exacerbated by the recent humidity or something. It was an easy and safe answer for me, and I told myself I would tear down the shed soon and replace it with another one. Problem solved. Over the next few days, I noticed the mold in other places. In the shower at first, and the kitchen. Places you would expect to see mold grow in an unkempt house. I'm a studious man, though, and always kept our house clean. I inspected the whole house and found the rot in nearly every room. Plaster walls and wooden beams just covered in the stuff. Disgusting greenish-brown mold. I debated calling in an expert. It was clear we had a mold problem, and I knew those could be dangerous. I was afraid. Afraid that if I did just that, he would inspect the shed. It was covered in the stuff, and I just couldn't have him poking around in there. I decided to find a way to deal with it myself. Luckily, I hadn't seen any in Tiffany's room, so I hoped she would be safe while I figured things out. I had taken a vacation from work, so while Tiffany was at daycare the next day, I set about tearing out the infected parts of the house. I quickly realized I was in over my head. The wooden beams behind the walls were rotting, and the visible mold had gone up nearly 3 times what I had seen the previous day. It didn't make any sense. I couldn't wrap my head around how it was growing so fast. I can remember sitting outside, just sipping scotch and smelling that musty earthen smell coming off the shed each time the wind would blow. It made me want to be sick all over myself. That same smell was overtaking the house. I needed to figure out a way to deal with what was happening to my home. I resigned the next day that I would need to tear down the shed and move Kristen's body so I could figure out what was going on. I didn't relish the thought of doing it, but I needed to call in an expert. That night, I checked Tiffany's room for mold before I put her to bed. It still seemed clean, but I made her wear a mask anyway, and told her tomorrow we'd be sleeping in a hotel. She seemed cheerful and excited about going someplace new with Daddy. It made me smile. I put on my own mask and went to bed after I dropped Tiffany off at daycare. I would get to work on tearing down that shed and moving the body. I fell asleep that night with the thought on my mind that this was all Kristen's doing. I dreamed of her, blood pouring out of her head as she laughed at me, still half wrapped in that rug. She cackled like some kind of witch, wanting to show me that this was her curse. She had done this to me. Her eyes remained wide, and her laugh sounded toxic, even as her body rotted away. Greenish, brownish mold covering her skin and rotting away her features. Her body turning to a disgusting mush of undulating liquid rot. That smell filled my nostrils, and I could taste it in my mouth. I woke up in the dark, choking, and ripping the mask from my face in an attempt to breathe better. Each wheezing breath was filled with that stench. It was in my mouth and my lungs. The smell of dirt and mold. It was rot through and through. That's when I felt it. The mattress was soft and wet. I pulsated slightly as I seemed to sink deeper into it. My fingers sunk into what should have been foam, but it felt fuzzy and soggy. And I was able to bring up a fistful in my hand. The stench grew stronger when I did, and in a fit of sudden, disgusted realization, I leapt from my bed and flicked the light switch. I gagged and retched when I saw it. My entire bed was covered in mold. It had rotted all the way through as I slept. My clothes were damp with it. My skin was awash in gray, stinking sludge. It was more than my bed, though. The walls had started to fall apart from being consumed by it, and I could feel it squishing between my toes as I ran headlong toward the bathroom. It had taken over my entire bedroom. I nearly slipped on the slime that covered the bathroom floor and flicked on the light switch, only to see that it had overtaken the bathroom as well. Black patches of rot covered the ceiling, and grunge lined the sink. Even the cloth on the shower curtain was falling apart. I turned on the sink and relished the sight of the clear, clean water that flowed from the metal tap. I started washing it off my skin and rinsing it from my mouth as I did so. I swished water around and spit, only to see black and green chunks of rot land in the sink as I did. I gagged again and knelt at the toilet bowl to throw up. Even the taste of bile and the night's previous meal couldn't seem to wash the taste of mold from my mouth. It was her. I didn't know how it was possible, but she was torturing me from her grave beneath the tool shed. I laughed and cried at the same time at the absurdity and disgusting nature of what was happening. In the matter of a week, this rot had overtaken everything. I know, and I'm sure it was her doing. I cursed her name, spat out more globs of rot that were stuck in my teeth. I could swear I heard her laughing as I did. "Daddy?" The words came softly and weakly behind me, and I froze in horror. "I don't feel good." I turned to see my daughter, her mask off, standing in that rot-infested room behind me. Her skin was graying, and I could see patches of mold growing on her skin. Terror rushed over me as she walked closer. She was starting to cry, and so was I. I reached out to grab her, and that's when I felt the true horror of the situation in her skin. My fingers sunk deep into her. She was soft and fell apart like rotting fruit as I touched her. She was crying and saying it hurt as I pulled my hands away, and chunks of her flesh fell to the floor in gray clumps. I sobbed and wanted so badly to hold her, but every time I made any kind of contact, she fell apart a little more. She rushed in to hug me and threw her bleeding, slimy arms around my neck. I gagged and felt guilty as the smell of decomposing flesh hit. I wanted to hug her so much, but she was falling apart in my arms, her breaths becoming raspy and stilted. Her legs gave out beneath her, and I caught her limp, wilting body. I ran my fingers through her hair out of instinct, came away with chunks of flesh and mold in my hands. There was nothing I could do as I watched my little Tiffany fall apart and rot in my arms, till there was nothing left but rot-covered bones. That was 2 days ago. She's letting me rot slowly and live with the knowledge that she succeeded in taking her from me. That even in death, she's somehow the most vindictive and evil bitch I've ever known. I knelt at her grave yesterday, the shed now nothing more than a pile of mold, begging her to give my daughter back. Telling her it was an accident. Telling her I was sorry. Telling every fucking thing I possibly could. She didn't listen, and today I can't speak. My tongue has rotted away. A chunk of flesh fell off my face only a few moments ago, and I think it's nearly over for me. So, consider this my confession, or my last words, or whatever you want to consider it. It was an accident. I didn't mean to cause this. I just didn't want to lose my little girl. And instead, I lost her and everything else. I'm going to lay in the rot of my floor with what's left of her and hope I fall asleep and never wake up again.
Everything is rotten. Fitting tale, don't you think? And that was penned by Michael Marks, and again brought to beautiful life by Geoff Sturtevant. And that was Everything is Rotten. A fitting title, don't you think? What a great story by Michael Marks, and a wonderful job from our great Geoff Sturtevant. Moving on to our next part. There are things we would do for love that we would not do for anything else. Lies we tell, rules we break, blood we spill. Some write bad poetry, some sign away their souls. But love, my dears, is a fickle little green goblin. And when you make deals in the dark, you'd best read the fine print. And speaking of deals, I have a most delicious one for you. Yes, my wicked little wretches, the voice that has haunted you, thrilled you, wrapped itself around your most secret fears. is back. Soon, his voice will slip through the cracks once more, whispering just behind your ear, making you question whether that shadow in the corner just moved. But beware, he is not returning alone. Stay tuned, my darlings, because the next time you hear his voice, it might already be too late. The Nameless Street Ritual, written by Tor-Anders Ulven and performed by the voice that you have longed for in the night, Jason Hill, joined by the inimitable Geoff Sturtevant. Gather close and listen.
Pancreatic cancer. That's what it's called. The thing that's slowly killing my wife. Doesn't sound so horrifying, does it? Pancreatic. It's the cancer part that's bad, obviously. It's the cancer part that's slowly eating away at my wife, my one true love, relentlessly devouring every part of her until there's just a withering, wheezing stranger left. Her tormented gaze begging for it to be over, every fiber of her being aching for death. I tried everything up to that point, and I do mean everything. You'd be amazed and appalled at the sheer quantity of bullshit snake oil miracle remedy shit you'll find if you just go looking for them. All the healers, shamans, witch doctors, and loathsome charlatans preying on the weak and desperate. But conventional medicine had failed me, failed my wife, and I couldn't find it in me to give up, no matter how much she begged me to. At first glance, the Nameless Street seemed like just another hoax, a nonsensical ritual pasta designed to amass internet points. But the more I looked into it, the more I came to believe that there had to be some merits to it. Too many identical claims, too many similar experiences, too many vivid descriptions. Coming up empty on all other leads, I decided there'd be no harm in giving it a shot. The Nameless Street was as simple in its complexity as it was complex in its simplicity. At the end of an unnamed street, look for an abandoned house with a locked basement door. Find a way to get into the basement without breaking the lock. In the room beyond, you'll find 2 chairs facing each other. Make sure to lock the door again. Place 66 candles in a wide circle around the room. At the center, place 1/6 of a candle. When night is at its darkest, light all the candles. Sit down in the chair with the back turned toward the door and count loudly to 66 and 1/6. If you get it all right, the devil himself will appear, granting you a single wish in exchange for your soul. Finding the Nameless Street wasn't easy, but at the same time it wasn't that hard either. I just stumbled upon it, I guess. I went searching every evening after my visit at the hospital. That's the only thing that kept me going. Seeing her wasting away, another fragment of her dying every single day. Body, mind, soul. Soon there'd be nothing left but memories. I paced the streets tirelessly for weeks, making sure to cover as much ground as I possibly could. Then, one night, it was just there. The doctors gave her a month, maybe less. We'd been together since high school. It was 10 years. Got married as soon as we legally could, sharing dreams of children, a house, a dog, a station wagon, a normal, boring, wonderful life. We were going to grow old together, die together, locked in an unbreakable embrace, exhaling our last breath at the exact same moment. But now she was leaving, fading, and I felt helpless and lost and alone. I needed this. I needed it to be real. It was just like I imagined it. A harrowing house at the end of the street, all the windows smashed in, front door missing, exterior graying and faded. A faint smell of urine lingered inside, and the walls were all covered in tasteless graffiti. I didn't care to inspect the house itself. I was there for one thing. I descended the ramshackle stairs leading down to a surprisingly sturdy-looking wooden door and gave the handle a try. Locked. This was the place. When I wasn't at the hospital, Stan was. I didn't even have to convince him. I just wanted someone to be there by her side at all times, and I think he understood that. My brother got along well with my wife, and it seemed like the right thing to do. When I arrived after work, Stan would be there and we'd talk for a bit. It affected him too. Devoured him like it devoured me. He looked older than any younger brother should. I had to fix this, or we'd all just fade to nothingness. I returned the next evening with candles and tools. I had no idea how to pick a lock, but luckily some guy on YouTube did, and after about 30 minutes of finagling and cursing, I heard a soft click, followed by the door sliding open. The basement was just how I imagined it, too. Cramped, damp, dark. 2 chairs placed at the exact center of it. Once I'd made sure the door was locked, I started placing the candles in the wide circle, saving the 1/6 of a candle for last. I sat down in the chair with the back turned to the door and waited. When the night is at its darkest. How can you tell? Isn't the night just a lack of light? When the sun is down, isn't it just down? I felt stupid and ignorant, like I'd fooled myself into believing something that would never work, and was utterly ridiculous. Still, couldn't give up now. I had to try. I owed my wife that much. I started lighting the candles. I figured it wouldn't get any darker and couldn't very well spend all night in that creepy abandoned shithole. Better to just get it over with. It took a good 5 minutes to get all the candles in the circle lit, and I swallowed deeply before lighting the final one. It didn't feel any different, but I sat down regardless and started counting loudly to 66 1/6 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4. My voice rang hollow and insincere. I glanced around anxiously while counting, but save for the dancing shadows cast by the flickering candles, there was nothing. 33, 34, 35. Don't you find this hysterically ridiculous? A cheery voice queried from behind me. I suppose I wasn't really expecting anything to happen. I mean, not really. Thus, the sudden realization that someone was there, behind me, caused me to tumble off the chair in shock, and I spent quite some time desperately struggling to get back up. I mean, you must have stopped at 66 1/6 and going, whew, this is some next-level absurdist shit nonsense, am I right? He was not what I expected at all. He was young. Maybe in his mid-20s, long blonde hair, dressed in jeans and a white hoodie. He smiled widely, emerald eyes sparking vividly as they scanned the room. All you had to do was ask, he mimicked, holding a phone to his ear. No need for all this unnecessarily elaborate. He paused, waggling his right index finger around theatrically. I want to say, ritual? Who are you? I stammered incoherently. Such a useless question, he chuckled. Names have no meaning here. Are you... I staggered back into the wall. Are you the devil? Look, buddy, he grinned widely. It really isn't important. What is important, however, is what I can do for you. He wandered around the room nonchalantly, eyes darting back and forth between the flickering candles and me. He was tall and slim, yet unnaturally imposing, like he could squish me like a bug at any moment if he felt like it. I kept backing into the wall senselessly like a frightened animal. "Let's sit, shall we?" He beckoned for me to join him as he sat down. "We have much to discuss." "Jesus Christ," I mumbled. Was this really happening? Nothing about it felt right. It felt unholy, blasphemous. My back scraped against the cold, protruding bricks of the wall, like the pain somehow grounded me to reality. "Jesus fucking Christ," I added. "Look, you can call me anything you'd like if it makes you feel better." His piercing eyes dug into mine. "It really doesn't matter what fantasy you subscribe to. In the end, they're all nothing but lies, just like names, you know? They only hold meaning to owners and believers. Let's just say, I'm neither. Now, please, just sit, James. You're making this whole satanic deal thingy very awkward for both of us." "How? Don't you know my name?" I mumbled, still subconsciously backing into the unmoving wall. He threw his head back and laughed heartily. "So, you came here ready to summon the literal devil, but you're surprised he somehow knows your name? Oh, James, you are really out of your depth here. You know that, right?" He motioned towards the vacant chair. "Sit, James. Sit. And we will discuss what I can do for Nora." The mention of her name brought me back from whatever delirious state I was in. I suppose I immediately stopped caring whether it was real or not. The end justifies the means. Isn't that what they say? Even if I was hallucinating, even if this was some insanely convoluted hoax, I had to give it a shot. I'd never forgive myself if I didn't at least try. I hesitantly stumbled to the chair and sat down facing the man. "How do you know her name?" I asked. "How can you possibly know any of this?" We've been through this, James. I know all I need to know, and that's just how it is. For instance, I know that Nora, sweet darling Nora, is slowly dying from cancer. I say slowly, but that's really not the case anymore. Is it? I'd give her maybe a few days, a week at most. Better start making some arrangements, choose a nice coffin, find a decent little plot, organize the service. These things take time, you know. You wouldn't want to half-ass her funeral now, would you, James? I felt a sudden rush of anger. Anger and resentment and sadness and despair. I wanted nothing more than to just punch his infuriatingly carefree face in. But something deep down inside me told me that would be a horrible idea. Instead, I just broke down crying in heavy, convulsive sobs. There, James, my boy. There, it isn't over yet." He smiled. "What if I told you that I could take it out of her? The cancer? Just reach into that frail, broken body and rummage around in there until it was all gone. Wouldn't that be something?" I stared at him blankly, tears running down my face. Could you do that?" I murmured. Could you really do that?" "I could." He leaned back, hands behind his head. "But, I'd have to put it somewhere else. Natural order, balance, all that jazz. But I'll do you a solid, since I kinda like you, James. What do you mean? See, what I do with it, the cancer, is entirely up to me. I mean, I could just stuff it in you. And normally I would. You know, I'm a bit of a stickler for irony. I mean, you know how it goes. You can't live without the love of your life, so you make an unholy deal with some diabolical entity to save her, only to die days later. Hilarious. But since you've grown on me like a tumor, I'll do you one better. What do you say we stick the big C into your worst enemy instead? My worst enemy? Did I even have enemies? I mean, I didn't really like my boss, and my neighbor was incredibly annoying. Truth be told, I could really do without the "you're not good enough for my daughter" attitude from my mother-in-law too, but an enemy? I suppose my coworker Eric was the closest thing I had to an enemy. He was demeaning and malicious, always going out of his way to make me look bad. The more I thought about it, the more I realized just how much I hated him. "Yes," I said. "Do it. There's this guy, Eric, at my job." "Oh, I'm sorry," he interrupted. "I think you misunderstood me. I don't need to know who you think your worst enemy is. No, James, my guy. I know who your worst enemy is. I just need a yes and the old handshake to confirm our arrangement. That's all." "How do I know you can do it?" I suddenly felt a sobering doubt rising. This was all too good to be true. Too fucking crazy to be real. "How do I know I can trust you?" "Oh, I'm glad you asked," he chuckled. "It's smart, you know, to question these things. Sure, I manifested in this locked basement out of thin air and know more about you and your wife than any random stranger possibly could, but I get it. You need proof." He stood up from the chair and leaned in close to me. I instinctively sank into my seat, desperately trying to avoid his piercing gaze. Now, I would love to say that this wasn't going to hurt. His eyes gleamed eerily in the darkness. But I'd be lying. And truth is everything, isn't it? That's why you're here. For the truth. Granted, you might not know it yet. But you will. And who knows? You might even come to thank me one day. "What are you?" With inhuman speed, he stuck both his hands into my chest. I know it's impossible. Of course, I know it's impossible, but the pain was real, and the blood was too. Insufferable pain, like every nerve ending in my body was set on fire. Fountains of blood showered us both, and I felt the sudden presence of impenetrable darkness. "Oh, don't cross over yet, Jamesy boy," he laughed. "We're only just getting started." I could feel him touching me from the inside, fingers digging into tissue and muscle and organs, every little prod bringing insurmountable waves of torment, somehow spreading to every pain receptor at once. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't scream. But I imagine every synapse in my body lighting up simultaneously to form a hysterical howl. "Ah," he licked his lips. "There we go. Just the suckers we were looking for. They can be a handful, oh, let me tell you. And all this blood makes it hard too, you know? It takes practice." With a forceful yank, he pulled his hands back, leaving behind a gaping hole in my chest. I should be dead, I thought. as I stared into the mangled depths of my own body. I was convulsing uncontrollably in spasming seizures, but I still managed to get a long, good look at what he was proudly holding in his blood-dripping hands. "You recognize them?" He laughed. "They're called lungs, primarily used for breathing, or so I've been told. Ugh, ugly bastards though, don't you think? Most of that stuff you find on the inside doesn't look as good as on the outside. I guess there's some meaning to it, you know. Aesthetics and such." He waved them around playfully, blood squirting everywhere. Every muscle in my body was spasming violently now, and my mind was starting to slip, overwhelmed by the unimaginable pain. "I'm going to die," I thought. "This is it. This is where they'll find me." But just as the alluring darkness was about to overcome me, I was brought back by his cheery voice. "So, does that do it?" he asked, his mouth now inches from my ear. "Are you convinced? Do we have an agreement?" I tried my best to nod, but I'm not sure you could easily discern the voluntary movements from the involuntary anymore. Blood was flowing in thick streams from the gaping wound on my chest, pouring into an impossibly deep pond on the cold concrete below. Suddenly, he grabbed my hand and shook it vigorously. "Good boy," he laughed heartily. "It's a deal then. I'll yank the nasty tumors from sweet, darling Nora and pack your worst enemy full of the stuff. Really can't wait for this one, James. Sounds like an absolute riot." The darkness was closing in, and I felt some manner of peace as a thick blanket of heavy tiredness enveloped every part of my being. "I'll be on my merry way then," he said. "People to meet, people to eat, you know how it goes. Zippity-doo-dah, zippity-day, kaloo-kalay. Oh, what a glorious day. Goodbye, James." I could hear him walking towards the door, heavy steps echoing through the room. Too heavy for his lithe frame. Everything was turning black now, and I suppose I was mere seconds away from passing out, and on. His voice brought me back once more. "Oh, right, I forgot," he chuckled. "You'll probably need these." Mind-numbing pain shot through my body as he pushed his hands into the wound again, brutally rummaging around in there for what felt like ages. Then, with a sudden yank, he was out again. "There you go," he said. "Good as new, and keep those suckers clean now, you hear? Stay away from cigarettes and huffing asbestos." He laughed. "Anywho, be seeing you, James. I have a feeling we'll talk again real soon." And with that, he was gone. I was left slumped over my chair, wheezing and spasming for minutes before realizing I was completely fine. I refused to believe it at first. I examined my chest thoroughly, every inch of it, then turned my attention to the floor. Not one drop of blood. Not so much as a paper cut on my chest. It was like none of it had ever happened. But it did. Didn't it? The pain was real. So real, horribly, gruesomely real. Minutes of excruciating torture that felt like years, and then nothing. I didn't stick around to question what had happened. I got out of that basement in a panicky haste and never looked back. When I got home, I immediately collapsed on the couch and slept for 12 hours straight. I'm sure I would have slept longer, probably days, maybe a week. But I was ripped from my deep slumber by the sound of my phone. "Yeah?" I mumbled. "Who's this?"
"James,
Stan yelled excitedly.
you're not gonna believe this. It's a fucking miracle."
A miracle. Even the doctors agreed. There was just no medical explanation for Nora's sudden recovery. No rational way to describe how the cancer just vanished. Poof. Not a trace left in her. A miracle, they all agreed. Deep down, I knew that wasn't the case, of course. It wasn't miraculous at all. In fact, it was probably the exact opposite, but I didn't care. I was just so happy that she was still here, still alive, and still breathing. I've never cried like I cried that day. Tears of joy. Who knew such a thing could be real? Weeks went by, and that night in the basement slowly faded from memory. I guess I just went with it, you know? Pretended it was all some vivid hallucination brought on by sleep deprivation and desperation and grief. And when Eric didn't get horribly sick and die like I'd secretly hoped, I just let it all go. Life moved on. Except that it didn't. It all stopped in that basement. Maybe not stopped, but perverted. Grew out of control like cancerous cells. My wife sat down with me a month later. "We need to talk," she said. I could tell by the look on her face that it wasn't anything good. There were tears, lots of them, crocodile and otherwise, and a pained, guilt-ridden expression. She wanted a divorce. She told me. She'd been seeing another man for quite some time now, but because of the cancer and her imminent death, she didn't have it in her heart to tell me. But now that she was healthy and had her life back, she wanted to move on. Wanted to find happiness again. "Who?" I remember yelling. "Who the fuck is he?" "It's your brother," she sniffed pathetically. "It's Stan." I suppose my life ended there. Betrayal comes in all shapes and sizes, but from my own brother, my own flesh, my own blood, it was too much to bear. I guess I felt it already then. The hate. That seething anger and fury and resentment consuming every fragment of my existence from there on out. She moved out the same day, packed her shit, and went to live with my brother. I sat in the darkness of my trashed living room for days, fueled and fed by nothing but bubbling detestation and loathing and hate. I wanted to burn him alive, nail him to the wall, dig out his eyes with a rusty knife. He was already dead to me, but I wanted him dead to the world too. My worst enemy. And then, like clockwork, he got diagnosed with cancer. Pancreatic. Oh, such a beautiful word, just rolls right off the tip of your tongue. Pancreatic. Instant. Terminal. My brother died days after they first caught it. It spread faster than anything they'd ever seen, they told me. A reverse miracle of sorts. There was a funeral. I didn't cry. I don't know that I'll ever cry again. Nora couldn't deal with his death. Her sudden recovery, followed by the hope of a new life with a new love, smothered instantly by cruel and hideous irony. She hung herself in Stan's garage a week later. I tried to cry at her funeral, I really did, but it was all empty. Hollow. A void. A soulless husk. There was this moment after they'd lowered her coffin, a brief second of serene silence. No birds, no grieving masses, no wind. Just a perfect moment of tranquility. I could hear him clearly then, in the back of my mind. A cheery chuckle, a hearty laugh. I have a feeling we'll talk again real soon. Just like the uncontrollable growth of abnormal cells, the amassing sum of my sins spread to cover every aspect of my existence. There is no miracle reverse or otherwise, waiting for me at the end of the line. There's no light at the end of the tunnel. There is no end to the tunnel. There is no end. As I stare into the fathomless depths of my empty, void soul, I can only nod and agree. Real soon.
You know, some people take up knitting when they're desperate. Others, they summon malevolent forces from behind the veil. Tomato, tomato. But remember, the void always collects its debts. And unlike your student loans, there are no deferments. What a show, my dear listeners. A buffet of rot, ruin, and regret. Truly a night to remember. Don't you just love the smell of impending doom? So crisp, so inevitable. But before you vanish into the mist, let's do this one last time. Press the buttons. You know the ones that whisper promise of more terrifying delights, more spine-tingling tales. Like, subscribe, follow, tap the bell, commit to the darkness, my dears. It's already committed to you. And of course, leave me your thoughts. Tell me whose voice still lingers in your mind. Whose footsteps do you hear when you think you're alone? And Sherry, devoted listener, I'm still waiting for your comment. But our bedtime tonight has drawn to a close. The veil is thin, but even I must rest. Until we meet again, my dear unfortunate darlings, stay out of the light and don't look behind you.